Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama. Welcome to Werewolf the Podcast. This is episode 19. Hopefully you've listened to the episodes up to now, then this might make a little bit of sense. If not, then it might not. But if you did listen to them, then if you'd listened to them, then it would. So I would go and listen to them first before you listen to this one, if that makes sense. This one's called The Wolf's Wife. I was out having a little fatal furry fun in the town of St Andrews, Fife. You must have heard of St Posh Wankers Andrews, the golf capital of the world. It has great architecture, history, sightseeing, thingamies, and architecture. It also has a university where you go if you're posh and you don't get into Oxbridge because you're a bit thick. St Andrews makes getting into its medieval-assed halls much easier than Camford. You don't need the grades, you just let mother and father buy you a place on the course of your choice. You know, the BA of History of Drama and Leg Wobbling, or maybe the BA in the role of French dyslexic poets in the space race, or something even more stupid like economics. The town, city, placey also has mad golf tourists invade it from all the world's wealthiest countries. Well, it also had the rich arrive from the developing countries that they run and steal from also. Maybe the title of a developing country is wrong. It should probably be the poor countries from which they steal and make those poor countries poorer. Is poorer a word? I'm not sure, but it seems to fit. These feckless golfing fools are all going there to play the stupidest game that exists. They get dressed in the most expensive and silliest clothing that you can wear to make you look expensively stupid. I'm convinced that golfing fashion styles are put together by those hurt by the game in some cruel way. According to the Financial Times, St Andrews has the highest tourist spend per day per visitor in the UK. I like the rich and I like tourists. Tourists are really great fun. They have a tendency to think they are safe due to them being in St Andrews, which is a bit like Hogwarts from Harry Potter land. They can't see there being anything terrible there like crime or herpes or even the odd werewolf, although I'm not that odd. The golfers, I may have hinted, are all knobheads. The golfers deserve to, die just because they like the game. Honestly, it's just marbles with a big, long, fuck-off walk. What was it, the quote that Winston Churchill said? Hitler's a maniac? No, it was about golf. The game of golf spoils a good walk. I describe it as a stupid game to go out and play for big bags of expensively dressed stupids. I hate golf. You might be getting the idea. It's a sport that I am not naturally good at. That means I hate it with a passion that the game deserves. If I am no good at it, yet a 72-year-old semi-senile American dressed like his flag is, then it's really not worth my time. I also hate those that enjoy it, those rich scumbags who do the golfing stuff. Just that enjoyment of something so bad would give me another reason to kill them if I actually needed any reasons. The golfers also unwittingly wander on the open fairways, and with so many courses, I think it's 18ish in St Andrews, there's always a quiet time to play on a peaceful green or three. That is ace for me when wanting to wolf around. It provides me with many a course choice for many a course meal on many a course choice of courses. The city also has a large body of incredibly affluent international students during term time, wealthy students who have rarely had to suffer or show fear. They have money and influence, so when that money and power does not protect them, they lose all hope very quickly. The money and the influence have also given them the overconfidence of our betters. Overconfidence that can lead them into all sorts of issues. I love it there. It's like a supermarket of wealthy people, like a world buffet with many different human flavours, quite literally. I also like the multitude of foreign visitors because it takes a while for anyone to work out that they've disappeared when they are suddenly gone. You know, they may have decided to go and explore somewhere else in Scotland. Like my belly. I had just fed on the West Sands beach, a sweet young thing that I met in a bar on North Street. She'd been in her second year of, whatever she'd been studying. It wasn't very interesting, and she wasn't that bright. She was not a significant loss to literature, science, medicine, or whatever she was doing. She tasted French. No, I'm not going to say she was like garlicky or something like that, or tasted of frogs. It's just that after tasting many cultures and countries' offerings, you recognise these things. I finished eating and walked back along the beach towards the town. My posit walked by me, and we were enjoying the wind blowing from the sea. In our heads, we had the after-feed joy, and were discussing the favourite moments of the kill, a most enjoyable post-prandial chat. If you don't know what my posit is, he's my invisible wolf soul that is my best friend, and he can combine with me to become the werewolf or the wolf. Please go listen to other episodes. The telepathic conversation dwindled to silence as the wind had changed direction, and from out of nowhere I was hit with a gentle tap of a sledgehammer blow of a smell in the nasal region. Something amazing smashed my senses. There was a specific smell, an intoxicating aroma. It was like taking a line or two of 98% Peruvian proof coke. The scent burst into my brain, releasing massive doses of endorphins that rushed around my body. It was incredible. I needed to know what the smell was, and I needed to know where it came from to get to know it. My posit raised his snout and head and sniffed the air, turning his face this way and that. A great toothy smile spread across his face. His great grey tongue lolled from his mouth as he sent powerful emotions and thoughts to my forebrain. "What is it?" I asked. "It's not an it, it's a her," he sniggered. "A her?" I repeated, now intrigued. "She's near, and she's been here recently. She's trying to find us." And this is all he would say. He refused any more questions. That was the first time I smelled it, and I spent a lot of time searching for its owner over the next few weeks. I would return to St Andrews for a lot of food, which was always easy to find in the university town with such a high student suicide rate, and with a hope that I would find the amazing aroma again. The best time to find any odour was on one of those few still winter nights in St Andrews. If the stars were out, especially if it was cold and frosty, her flavour would be in the air. I think it was a her. It would stifle the other smells humanity created through its waste and stench. I desperately needed to find its source, as it was so tantalising, yet always just untraceable. It was as if the owner knew how to mask herself from me. Maybe she did. It was all too exciting. Night after night I would wander the streets to try and find her. Night after night I would get a fleeting sense of her presence, but never find her. It was a very long time before I smelt a bit as strong as that first night. It was the following damp January when walking through the main town. I'd been on the hunt but had got bored, so I just fed and left. No torture, no fun, just food. To be honest, I'd started to get fed up with sensing the perfume but not finding my target. Then I got a deep and satisfying whiff of her. I was walking back to the car at night through the main street past one of the fancy new glass-fronted bars, juggling my keys from hand to hand as I enjoyed the scrutiny of those that passed by. It had been the miserable pre-snow rain and the streets were not as busy as usual. I looked up from my juggling and I noticed a beautiful scene in the massive picture window at the front of a bar. 4 young, unusually pretty women sat having drinks and what looked like a lot of fun. They were all seated at a high table, their stools surrounding it. It was lit like a scene set on a stage to promote the bar. Nothing could entice people more from the outside to the inside on a wet winter's night. Overriding everything was the scent. The heady scent that ignited something in the wolfy part of me. The women were all so beautiful and talking and laughing at the news of the day, and I stopped and paused, squeezing my grip around the keys as I stared at the scene, the leather creaking on my gloves as it tightened. My posit had stopped dead also, and I heard him whistle in my head. "Whoa," he said. "It is her." He looked at me from his place alongside. "It is her, Will. She's found us." "She who?" I said in reply, but was already focused on the table of tens. Smiling, I made my way towards the bar door to see if I could get involved in their evening. It was only on waiting patiently for two men to leave the doorway that I noticed something strange in the stage production of the scene in the window. I stopped, my mouth agape ridiculously. It lay there below the table. It was something that should not have been, something that I had only ever encountered once before in my life. I turned towards my posit Fenrir and dumbly pointed at the creature that was sitting at the feet of the women. Is that a posit? Is that an actual posit?" I asked. He nodded his head in response. "Yes, Will," he smiled. "That's most definitely a posit." Fenn's ears had pricked up and he shook himself to clear some of the moisture from his fur that was not wet. I could sense his excitement, and that excitement was transferred to me. It was definitely not a big dog. It was definitely a posit. There sat a gigantic fuck-off white wolf at the base of the table, snoozing. I couldn't move. I was fascinated. As I stared, the lying posit started to twitch its nose, and then it swiftly lifted its head and looked through me. No, it wasn't me, it noticed. It was Fen, my posit. Their eyes met, and they just stared at one another for a while. The world seemed to stop as they communicated. I couldn't listen to their conversation, but I knew they were having one. As I continued to watch, my mouth now hanging open, one of the women slowly withdrew from the conversation and reached a hand down towards the resting posit. It was as if she was going to tickle it behind the ears to settle its restlessness. As she strove to touch it, she stopped and froze, and then slowly turned to look out of the window for something, and I knew she was looking for me. Her gaze crashed into mine, and that brief moment, well, it felt like it lasted 1,000,000 years. I felt her in my head, and I felt myself in hers. Sheer recognition of another one of me. Her hair was deep auburn red and neatly styled on the top of her head. Her eyes were ice blue and piercing. Those eyes were no normal eyes of a human monkey. Those eyes were that of a predator, a killer. She had me transfixed, unmoving for the first time in my life. I was literally unable to leave that spot or look away. I now knew how my prey felt, locked rigidly in position, terrified and yet excited. Her features were perfect and cold, with high cheekbones and a sculpted nose, giving a general regal air to her looks and attitude. She flowed from her seat and insinuated her way to the window. There she stood facing me. She wore a short blue dress on her pale skin. The dress was a perfect, classic satin couture style in livid blue. Her hands went to her hips and she stared at me. Her posit sat up and shook its head and yawned. It then made its way to its feet with another full body shake, padding to her side and sitting by her to create a magical scene from a film. It was a scene that my life had always needed to see, but I'd not known that I needed it until now. I could focus on nothing else, only on her and the wolf before me. She smirked at me and then looked down and inspected her red nails, slowly lifting her head and directing her smile at me like a weapon. It rocked me with its power. It was a lot more than an ordinary smile. It was a sharp-toothed expression of amusement and beauty. I was in utter awe of her. I didn't know what to do. Everything else in life I had ever wanted, I just took without thought. And I wanted her, but I wanted her to want me to want her. That's weird. The moment suddenly broke as she looked away. I felt somewhat hurt that she'd let go of that instance that should have gone on forever. But instead of the usual anger, I felt something else, a need for her to give me that attention again. She turned to her friends, who seemed to be in slow motion now. She grabbed her jacket and put on a fur hat. She was ignoring me. I could not stop looking at her. I was willing her to see me again. My posit smirked, and a thought from him, "You got it bad," came swimming into my head from his. She had all my attention and knew it, so she took her time teasing me with her apparent indifference and with each subtle thing she did. She smiled to herself again as she stood and opened her bag, removing a compact with which she checked her perfect makeup. She put on her fur coat and left, saying her goodbyes to her friends, giving each a small hug and a kiss. The girls looked confused and questioned her going, so she nodded towards me, where I was transfixed. 3 faces turned my way and beamed. Each of the girls gave the others a knowing look and a giggle, and then she left them. I stood motionless and waited, feeling a little stupid and embarrassed in front of the women still seated in the bar. It was a rare thing for me to feel this way, so I became a little annoyed inside. I also felt a sense of loss that she'd gone from my sight. All new feelings for me. Then the front door opened and she stood in front of me for a moment. She wore a cream white full-length fur and a matching hat and looked like I suppose a Russian princess. She wished the doorman good night before walking towards me, with her posit trailing her at first and then with it running before her, tongue lolling towards me. My posit in response charged forward and met hers as though it was a best friend that it had not seen for years. She continued that walk towards me, her eyes fixed on mine, a predatory grin on her lips. Her walk was, setting off alarm bells in my head. I'd never seen anything that I wanted more. The 2 posits played excitingly as tiny pups would. They were busy chasing, running, and made their gratings in very doggy ways. She walked past them towards me, and as she approached, my senses were in absolute overdrive. The beauty of her graceful movement, athletic and without a waste of any energy. I could observe that she was a powerful creature in complete control of her physical being. For you humans with your poor sight, hearing and smell, I can never do this description of her justice in prose. You are just too poorly equipped. The smell was like the blossoming of colours. Blues and whites surrounded her, and she fucking sparkled. She stirred parts of me into a frenzy. Not a hurtful frenzy, but just a need. I was feeling things I had never known. A want and yet not a requirement to take. Hunger, yet not a want to feed. She stopped, smiling. She was just a couple of feet in front of me. The effect was something like a half brick to the side of the head, that brick removing all thoughts of anything but her. She spoke. "I think we should talk, Will." I was speechless. How did she know my name? "I've been keeping a somewhat impatient eye on you. You do a lot of killing, huh?" she asked, amusement playing on her lips. Her accent was a mixture of Eastern European or Russian or Slavic with very, very good English. She seemed very smart and gave off a sense of intelligence well beyond mine. She had me completely worked out already. I was tongue-tied. I had no idea how to reply. I wanted to tell her off, to answer her cleverly and candidly. That's what I would usually do, but I just couldn't. "No, it's not that I disapprove of the killing. It's just the fact that you do so much of it in my territory. How am I supposed to keep up?" she laughed. She was playing with me. She was playing with me, and I did not know how to respond to it in the slightest. I wouldn't usually allow this. I would have taught her not to be wise with me. I would have been strong and fucking alpha, but I could not be in this case. She took hold of my hand and gave me a wicked smile and dragged me into the night. The posits followed, walking flank to flank. I could hear them in my head communicating with each other. Not in a language I knew, but it was as if they'd a lot of catching up to do. "Okay, are you going to tell me who you are?" I asked. I'm your wife, she said. She was my what? I thought, and I heard my Fen laugh alongside the new posit. She's my what? Fen was laughing so hard that he could hardly communicate, even telepathically. She's your wife, Will, he eventually said. Okay. I don't remember having a wife, I answered. She could obviously hear our conversation just as the posits could, so she giggled in response and pointed at the posits. They were in a rapture, running alongside each other, body touching body, tongues lolling and happy. Well, I am, she said, and you've been an incredibly big pain in the backside to find, Will. So now you need to catch up with the loving of me. She held out her hand and I took it as something was just right. I could hear the posit in my head as he span and played with the other. As we walked to wherever we were going, I was a little perplexed and confused, but the level of interest in what would happen next was much more intriguing, so I thought I would keep my mouth shut and just see what would happen. As we walked, we talked. Well, I walked and she walked and talked. Her voice was captivating. It took me somewhere wild and free. She smelled like, well, I can't explain what it was like. It was like, oh God, it was just really nice, and it took me some time to focus on what she was actually saying. Life would get interesting in the next wee while, as they say in Scotland. She'd talked for most of the walk, but nothing had gotten through to the understanding part of me. I'd just been lost in my thoughts as I travelled. She then paused and stopped walking and looked at me. Shall we hunt? Oh, of course. You've no idea who I am, do you? My name is Aza. I ran the name a few times in my head. Why not? I replied. We walked behind a sweet young couple who were giving off the smells I relate to sexual excitement. We followed them as I could see the interest that Aza was giving them. She wanted to hunt, chase, and maybe kill. Her entire focus now was on her prey, and I could sense the predator's mind start to function. These poor little sheep would stray and probably lose their way this night, poor little lambs that they were. We walked in silence, somehow comfortably holding hands. It felt right. All focus was borne on our prey. Behind us, the two posits walked flank to flank. Still, their minds buzzed with communication, but their excitement grew as they sensed our excitement and interest in the hunt. We were silent, walking and listening to our prey chatting as they bimbled along. Unaware, they did not sense the danger the night brought. They were lost in their own little bubble, a dangerous place to be when werewolves walk the same streets. An insensible state of being within any environment. We followed them into what could be classed as a nightclub if St. Andrews would lower itself to have such a thing. The Lizard was a bar in the basement of another bar and restaurant. It played mind-numbingly bad dance music, badly mixed by bad DJs through a tinny bad sound system. It pained me to my very core and even hurt my teeth after having a youth filled with great dance music mixed by those DJ gods like Carl Cox. The club stunk of ancient alcohol and ancient sweat on young bodies. The bodies swayed almost rhythmically to the painful music in the manner of alcohol-diminished dancers on the world's worst dance floors. Aza took point in a position that let her keep full awareness of the lambs and yet keep us unseen, or at least unnoticed from their dull eyes. She was focused entirely on them with a tick twitching in her jaw. She became more beautiful as her thirst started to excite me. Her face turned to mine, and at that moment, I fell deep into that pit which I now know is love. I read in her eyes the want and the need for violence and the sexual charge that it gave her as she stared, ready to separate our victims from the herd. She smiled once more and, with a flick of her hand, told me to wait where I was as she strode with the utmost confidence over to the young couple and became all to them as she did so. They stared. They lusted as her lithe walk entranced them. She at that moment was their welcome death, and they They wished for it. Their life was at an end, but to be honest, this moment and her involvement would be the most significant of the little sheep's lives. I smelt a change in context in the air. The victims now looked upon her with their own predatory eyes. They both wanted her. To be frank, the room wanted her. But these two in particular were feeling the burst of raw sexual charge that she effervesced. They stood, jaws dropped and slack mouths open, dumb monkeys, unable to do anything about the drive they both wanted to be fulfilled. Azza just pushed past them to the bar, and they never took their eyes off her. She partially ignored them, only offering a flash of eye contact as the bartender, a cute young man, decided to ignore the queue, waiting in line for his attention. His focus lay on the beautiful woman newly arrived, and he crabbed his way to Azza to serve her needs first. She controlled these people with her mere presence. Her manner and confidence controlled all around her. They had no choice but to do what she wished. It was not fear that generated this veneration, but the raw nature of her sexuality. All wanted to be with her, and all wanted her to want them. I felt a moment as the green monster of jealousy leapt into my brain. She seemed to realise this and looked at me briefly, and with a reassuring smile, she calmed that creature as she told me all this was for me in that one look. After getting served the martinis that she ordered, she turned away from the bar and started to make her way back to me across the dance floor. The dancers formed a bubble of space around her that none entered. She just walked, and the sea of people parted to allow her passage. The victim's eyes had never left that walk, and as she got to me, she passed me a drink, and I knew what to do instinctively. We both raised our glasses to this cute pair, and they felt bliss. In that one moment, they saw a future that could be a very interesting one for both of them. Then the spell broke as the two started to speak hurriedly between themselves. The conversation was exciting and full of fun and naughtiness, and as it ended, the pair of them patted themselves down and started to make their way through the press of bodies on the dance floor towards us. Their journey was not as unimpeded as Az's. They had to push and shove their way past all to get to our company, which was what they needed. As they arrived, we were chatting and laughing in the pretense of not noticing them. Of course we were fully aware. When they did eventually arrive, I followed my old love's lead. She turned to them. They couldn't speak. The nerves of the moment had got to them, and they had no idea of what to do or say. Azza did, though. She turned and smiled at the couple. It was a smile that was hypnotic. It removed all fear, all abilities to make sound judgments, and all the abilities to raise any red flags were gone for the next few moments. Hi, I'm Azza. And this is my husband, Will. Do you wish to join us and see where the night goes? She asked them while sipping on her drink. We drank, we danced, and I just took her lead. One moment I was dancing with him, and then them, then her, then Azza, and our bodies combined in rhythm and dance in such a way that we did not think who was whom. As the bar closed, we left as a group. Azza and Jane laughed and giggled while holding hands as they walked before us. Timothy walked with me, somewhat silently but excitedly. I reached for his hand and held it. He took it with a hefty grasp, and I felt his body relax as he felt the moment in his very soul. We got to the taxi rank, and Jane and Tim moved to the nearest car. They were grieving the loss of this intimacy already. They did not know what to do or say to us. They did not want this moment to go away. Azza stared into my eyes as I watched the pair of them start to open the cab door and get ready for their goodbyes. We held each other tightly and kissed as they patiently waited for this moment of passion to end before they climbed into the car and had to leave. Azza broke the kiss and leant back into my arms so she could see my face. She brought the back of her right hand to her lips and wiped the moisture from her mouth as she smiled and nodded to me. I knew exactly what she wanted, so I nodded back. We broke our hold and, holding hands, turned to the taxi. "Would you like to spend the night with us?" she asked them, grinning and laughing. "We would like to have you," she continued. The feeling of relief and resolution in want came flooding from Tim and Jane. They looked at each other and smiled and nodded, and we walked towards the cab, where I held Tim and kissed him fully on the lips. Asa held Jane and enclosed her mouth in a similar moment of beauty. Asa then leaned back while being held in the arms of the woman and kissed the boy, and by some miracle I leant and kissed the girl, and we all laughed, relaxed, and were excited in the moment. On arriving at their home, a very nice little classy bungalow on the outskirts of the town, we left the taxi and walked up the path to the front door. Jane now put her finger on her lips as we quietly opened the door, mouthing that we have to be quiet, not to wake the kids. The wolves in us looked at each other and expressed a little more joy at this unexpected gift. In the back room, we were permitted to make noise once more, and the chat started as the flirting truly began and the drinks were got, music played and the fun began. Asa sat on the couch with Jane, and they stared into each other's eyes as we watched the two beautiful women meld together. Tim and I just sat on the couch opposite. He was tense and nervous, even under the influence of a lot of alcohol. Asa was facing Jane, and their bodies were close, touching at the thighs and hips. Asa reached for Jane's hair and started to partially play with it as she stared into her potential partner's eyes. The girl initially shied away and dropped her head. A level of embarrassment showed, and a slight unwanted gasp was given up from her lips. The wolf cupped the woman's chin, lifting it and looking into her eyes, nodding reassurance, and then bringing the woman's mouth to hers in the moment of the most delicious kiss. The kiss became more and more passionate as the girls dragged each other close and their bodies entwined, enmeshed, and became immersed in one another. The moment was truly delicious. Tim was wholly focused on the scene before him. The excitement was very apparent. He was very excited, nervous, and jealous, all at the same time. I was watching him, and my own needs required fulfilling. The scent of the pheromones, fresh sweat and pre-cum were heady. I grabbed the man's face and dragged it towards mine. At first he hesitated and tried to withdraw from my grasp. I held him firm and smiled in reassurance. He reached forward, his mouth opening and his eyes closing as he sampled my lips and relaxed, his soul lost in the oblivion of the moment. Over the next 3 hours the wolves lay with the sheep, a mixing of bodies, a mixing of fluids, a mixing of pleasure, a mixing of pain and wants and needs that could be realised. In the following hours, none of us knew where one body started and the other ended. None of us knew who was inside whom or pleasuring who. We writhed, we heaved. Sensations were passed between us as if they were one body and one shared mind in those moments. We knew the sheep in all their stupefied glory. That little prey-like centre in their mind was so easy to convince that we were all alike, that at this moment they were our equal. That's when Asa turned this into a truly beautiful moment for us. I sensed a change in her mental demeanour. She'd fulfilled her sexual needs. She dripped with sweat and lay with her sex engulfing Tim's while she shagged him hard, holding her posture by supporting herself with her arms. As she slammed her body into his hips, his face was that of ecstasy, but it started to change as she increased the power of each thrust into the young man's waist. His face changed, showing the beginning of confusion and suddenly a little fear and then pain. He stopped holding her hips and started to try to push those hips away from him. He was trying to slow Asa, trying to stop those meteoric thrusts as she slammed herself home. She stopped the ride and looked down at the man. "Do you really want me to stop, Tim? Are you not getting what you really want from me? Tell me to stop again and I will." The man's face changed. He'd lost the intensity of the new sensations he was feeling. "Just tell me what you want, Tim. Just tell me and you can have more." The man was lost. I want more," he whispered. "You want more?" she asked, a seductive smile playing across her lips as she began to move in his lap once more. "You want more," she repeated. "Yes, I need it," he replied. She laughed aloud and started to grind harder, driving her hips harder and harder into the man. His moans and groans became louder as she forced herself onto him with heavier and heavier thrusts. As the intensity built, she started to transform. Her eyes changed to the sapphire blue of her posits. The beast began to join in the moment. Tim's eyes opened for a moment, and he saw the woman before him start to change. Fear took him, but he soon accepted his fear for the sensations he needed to be fulfilled. She now took her full were form. She was truly beautiful. The monster before me was the most potent and sexually exciting beast-style creature that I had ever seen. My own excitement increased, and I could not take my eyes off this incredible display in front of me. I was behind his kneeling partner, slaking my own and her needs. Her face was buried deep in the bed's mattress, and she was screaming. I watched my goddess as she rode this poor human for the pleasure she needed like the predator she was. He no longer mattered. His life and soul were hers, and only of value for her needs. I could focus on nothing else, and my own body started to synchronize with Az's as she increased the power of each stroke. Again and again her body's powerful movements grew, going beyond the strength and power of any mere human. The poor monkey on the bed began to feel her true strength. He started to now yell with ecstasy and pain. He then began to scream as the creature that mounted him took him far beyond his tolerances. As he cried into the night, she leant over his face. Her eyes were looking directly into those eyes of fear and pain. Saliva dripped from her now wolf and toothy maw onto his face, her body a steam piston in action on the broken body beneath hers. She laughed in his face. "Come on, Tim. Come on harder, Tim. Harder," she roared, a guttural scream at him. He screamed in response, much louder. He was breaking beneath her, yet his screams were those of a man lost in his own world of sensations. "Tim," she said, "you're going to have the most incredible experience. I'm going to screw you to fucking death." And she did. With one last drive of her hips, he yelled out in the last moment of elation and was gone. Little had I known, but poor Jane had been taking the brunt of my own excitement. I had her hair in my right hand, and I had forced her face so hard into the bedding that she could not be heard over the noise of Azza and her prey. I lifted her face and jerked her head to look at mine. It was a mask of enraptured pain, a face now of smeared makeup, tears and snot, but one of sheer happiness. I laughed, and for a moment Az's eyes met mine. We were in each other's minds, truly together at this moment, like no one would ever understand or feel. 15 minutes later, Az and I lay on the bed. We lay on our backs, arms around each other, staring at the ceiling. I'd never experienced anything like those last few moments. It was more than sex. It was more than making love. It was an act only two predators of our level could enjoy. The sensations were too much for us. Post-orgasmic pleasure and the delight of causing wanted pain and death. The bodies of whoever they were now lay together on the floor in a bloody heap. I looked into Az's eyes as she looked into mine. In those moments, so much information was passed between us. True love. True love. She smiled and kissed me. Rolling onto her side, her hand rubbed my chest as she slowly reverted back to her human form. Suddenly a new sound. What was that? An infant was crying. No, it was two. She cocked her head and listened, slowly coming to her knees on the bed. Again she was excited. She smiled and motioned with her eyes in the direction of the door and the crying children. In return, I smiled and felt a flutter in my stomach. She reached for my hand and stepped off the bed, inviting me to follow her. Together, naked, sweaty and bloody, we slipped through the bedroom door into the dark corridor. We were drawn by the little distressed protests. The cries ceased, and again the house returned to silence. A ticking clock, the only noticeable sound. The kingdom of Fife is a wonderful place for a werewolf and his wife. Thanks for listening.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.